Thank you all for joining us today for our presentation of Embracing Your Five-Generation Workforce. My name is Susan Kurzeka. I'm with Larimer County Economic and Workforce Development. Have been on that team for over 8 years, working with job seekers of all ages and backgrounds.
And I'm Karrie Grama-Hatfield. I am the founder of Pearl Teams here in Larimer County, and I work with businesses and organizations to assist them with performance coaching and with really building their strategy to retain and empower their workforce to do well and to meet their goals.
Thanks, Karrie. So before we jump into our topic today, we want to send a shout out to our sponsors of the Workforce Symposium. This event would not be possible without them, and we're very thankful for their sponsorship. Today, what we'll be talking about is really looking at some of the workforce trends that we're seeing right now related to different generations. This is a very interesting time for our workforce. We'll start with those trends and then really dive into learning about the benefits of hiring candidates across all age ranges. There are contributions that each generation can kind of provide to our workforce, so we'll be going over those. And then we'll really end with looking at different tools and resources that we can use to update hiring practices and really encourage these generations to join us. So let's start by talking about the paradox that we're seeing right now in the workforce. So we're seeing about 11 million job openings, but we're also seeing an unemployment rate where people are really struggling to find work. And it's been this mismatch between job seekers and employers right now, which is a very interesting time. So if we look at, these are kind of the core 4 generations that we're seeing, but we're also seeing right now some traditionalists that are in the workforce. They're about 1%, so not represented on this graph. But as traditionalists are going out, we're actually seeing an influx of Gen Alpha that is going to be joining our workforce as well very quickly. So it's interesting where we have one generation going out, another coming in, which is really giving us 5 generations. Right now, the majority of our workforce is that millennial generation at 44%, but we're still also seeing a large portion of Gen Xers and baby boomers in the workforce as well.
It's amazing how we're transitioning to this place now where we've got 5 generations actually all participating together in the workforce for the first time ever.
If we look at related to Larimer County specifically, this is the breakdown of age in the county. You'll see that spike around, kind of that college age range, the traditional college age range, and that's most likely because of CSU here in Larimer County. But it's pretty stable across the ages of what we're seeing. Weld County as well. So you see that stability a little less on the baby boomer side, but still there's a wide age range in both of our counties of where we're at right now.
Okay, so let's play a little bit of true or false. True or false, the number of babies being born are sufficient to ensure that we have enough people for our future workforce. Give you a second to kind of consider that. So that happens to be false. Right now, we are not actually seeing enough reproduction to ensure that we've got enough people for a future workforce, which is good information for us. That tells us that something's got to change with our hiring practices. Okay, fact or fiction? A baby born today has a 90% chance of living to age 107. What do you think? That's a fact. That's kind of a scary fact.
That's a mind-boggling fact.
Right? Can you believe that? A 90% chance of living to age 107. So I heard something, and I wish that I knew the resource for this. It was a scientific publication that actually predicted that back around 2014, which was the year that my daughter was born, in fact, the first human had been born in 2014 that has the capacity to live to be 200 years old, right?
Wow, that's amazing.
I can't, I mean, I think that person would have to have a lot of luck on their side. But when you think about how much longer we're living, and you think about kind of the trickle down effect with what that means for workforce and what that means for all these systems we have in place for training, retraining, retirement, Social Security, the implications are really widespread when we think about numbers like that. Okay, so how does this really translate into real numbers? Well, we know here from the information that we've got via the CDC and the American Council on Science and Health that right now we're at an all-time low with our fertility rates. We've got about 1.73 births per woman, and the replacement rate that we really need for our workforce is about 2.1 births per woman. So we're not seeing that replacement rate right now, and that has some implications for what it looks like in terms of number of employees who are available to enter the workforce. We're just not hitting that replacement rate that we need to hit. And so that means we've got to look at how can we pull in workers from across a variety of generations to make sure we're meeting the needs of our society. I love this chart. I incorporate this chart into a lot of presentations that I do. This is some great census data. And what this really shows us is that we are currently here in 2024 in year 64 of what's known as the century of change. If you look at that chart that depicts 1960 there, and you look at how many millions of people we really had living here across the ages, you can see that we've got a lot of younger people and not so many older people once we get into that 65 and up range. But look at how this is projected to change once we reach the year 2060. That pillar is much more even across the age ranges. And that again has implications for the workforce. We've got a lot of individuals in that older age range, 65 and up, who are going to be around and be available to work and to contribute to the workforce.
I
Pretty
think
interesting graph there.
that sheer number difference too, and just the number of people as well in the millions and how that's changed over the last 100 years is really interesting.
It's just incredible.
Mhm.
So what does this really mean for the future of work in America? Obviously, these numbers have implications for our workforce here in the United States. So we have this old model where you would learn early on, and then you would work a long sort of career, generally in one sector, in one field, and then you'd retire. That was the model that really sustained us for many decades. But what we're seeing now, the current and what we can project to really be the future reality, is people are going to learn. Of course, you're going to get your training, your schooling, those skills that you need to enter the workforce, and you're going to work. And then we're going to see this cycle where you work and you learn, and you work and you learn, and you continue to gain new skills and perhaps enter into a different field at some point in your career. And rather than seeing retirement age stuck at 65, we're really going to see a lot of people rewiring at that point and entering encore careers. We're seeing a lot of trends in that direction already, but we'll see people make that choice to kind of rewire, relearn, instead of entering into what we've known as traditional retirement.
So when we look at age diversity and what it means for the workforce, there are a few different things that we see in multi-generational workplaces. So in a multi-generational workplace, there is, I think, a lot of, kind of open-mindedness. It can be very engaging. It can be a very proactive workforce. And part of that is just because of the benefits that each generation is bringing. I think having age diversity in the workforce can also cultivate a culture that really embraces and values workers of all ages and abilities because each person has something unique to contribute. And it also promotes inclusion because there are all different generations present and different ages. There really is that chance for higher engagement. And when folks feel higher engaged, typically there's more productivity as well. So the benefits that we see of having age diverse teams, and this is actually research that has identified specific opportunities. So I just mentioned kind of increased engagement. You do see increased productivity, and with increased productivity comes profitability from age diverse teams. Because again, there are diverse perspectives, there can be improved team problem solving and creativity. Um, and with those different perspectives, you tend to avoid that group think mentality because each person has that unique perspective to offer. There also is this opportunity to really have some knowledge transfer in the team because we can learn from each other and each other's unique perspectives. And then there is, I think, mentorship as well, where we have maybe some generations that are learning, maybe some older generations that are learning from younger generations and younger generations that are learning from older generations. And everyone in between, I think, has something valuable that they can give to other generations and they can receive from other generations.
And I love seeing that with businesses that I consult with, seeing that reciprocal mentoring and really
Mhm.
seeing that it goes both ways. I say both as if there are only two generations in the workforce, but really across all of those generations, I know you're going to get into some of the strengths of different generations in a little bit, Susan. But it's great to see in action with these businesses, older generations impacting younger generations and vice versa, younger individuals who are able to teach new skills to older individuals in the workplace and seeing how that overall really combines to just create a stronger business model for a lot of companies that we work with.
I think also too, we all have something that we can learn. We are all human. We are continuing to learn. I think the work learn model really shows that too, that it is a process over time that we're continuing to engage in.
Absolutely.
So when we look at each generation specifically, there are kind of a few contributions. This is not, kind of an end all be all. There are definitely some differences. These are just a few themes or patterns that we've noticed with each generation. If we look at the traditionalist generation, so again, about 1% of our workforce, so a small group right now, but typically this generation has, strong fundamental principles, so really valuing loyalty and rules in the workforce, really tends to understand their worth and take on those new opportunities because there is a lot to give. Um, the reason I think that we're seeing some traditionalists still in the workforce too is really that value of mental stimulation, human interaction, and some really in our economy right now are really looking for that extra funds, kind of whether they have that retirement or whether they're still trying to work up to that retirement.
Mhm.
So baby boomers tend to be, hardworking, really priding themselves on their achievements that they have in the workforce. This generation tends to learn new skills quickly and keep up with trends and that we're seeing in the workforce, which we're seeing a lot of those right now, especially.
Mhm.
Also valuing monetary incentives rewards, but this could include opportunities to donate as well. So any way that they can give back, or they can also receive incentives and rewards for their work that they've done.
I think that's such an important point that you make, Susan, about, really looking at what the motivating factors are across different generations. Because as we're encouraging business owners to really examine their practices and look at ways they can kind of revamp their practices to work for them and to help retain all of this great talent in the workplace, it's important to keep those motivating contingencies in mind. What is motivating a certain employee to stay? When you've got a great employee, why are they sticking around? A lot of times we're great at collecting the data on why people are leaving and we'll do exit interviews, but we're not always as great about, figuring out what is keeping our talent here. And this is where I think this information is really helpful. And you mentioned that, obviously this is not necessarily going to fit for every single individual who finds that they fit into each generation. You might have some outliers, of course, and we want to make sure that we don't overgeneralize. But using tools like this to help you examine what are those motivating factors? How can I use this information to help retain my great staff? I think that's such an important thing for businesses to continuously examine.
And I think the workplace is a very reciprocal relationship, right? There's a lot
Yeah,
that we gain from our employees, and then there's a lot that we can give to our employees as well.
absolutely.
Mhm. So Generation X, so typically 1965 to 1980, this generation tends to be pretty independent. And with that independence comes adaptability. So flexible schedules tend to work well. Working remotely can work really well. This generation also tends to see that intro into technology. And so technology adept and also highly adaptable. And you may see as we're going through some of these contributions, there are overlaps between the generations as well. So
Yeah,
sometimes I think we tend to focus on the differences, and there are differences, but there's also overlap too. And
that's
that's one of that's one of the things I think we'll dive into with the management strategies.
exactly, exactly.
So millennials, also known as Generation Y, this generation tends to be results oriented and really goal driven, and they tend to achieve goals better in relaxed environments. So having that time pressure and that stress can sometimes limit that goal achievement. Also, really innovative and creative thinkers can respond to different challenges that we might have in the workplace. And this generation in particular really appreciates kind of mentorship and training that really leads to a purpose.
And there's a lot of data on that mentorship piece where this generation in particular, when asked why they've moved on from certain positions, they often cite as one of their top three reasons of not sticking in a job that they just weren't getting those mentorship opportunities. So it seems like it's really
Mhm.
important for everybody, of course, to create those mentorship opportunities. But that is something that really seems to resonate with this particular generation.
Think there is that kind of constant interest in growth, right? And really constructive feedback and learning and growth, which you'll see in other generations as well. But like you said, Carrie, particularly with the millennials. So Gen Z, this generation really, grew up with technology, so
Yeah.
very tech savvy. When we look at education, some of the research suggests that this generation may be the most well educated, meaning there's a large proportion of this generation that has gone on to continue education in kind of higher ed.
Mhm.
You also really see that motivation to want to make a difference in their work. So they really tend to find companies that aligned with their values and what they would like to accomplish. And then Generation Alpha, we're not quite seeing in the workforce yet. So this is 2013 to now. But this is something that we'll want to stay aware of, as Generation Alpha enters into the workforce, because there are unique contributions that are going to be happening with this generation as well.
Definitely, it's gonna be interesting to see what this particular generation ends up bringing to the workforce.
Mm, definitely.
Okay, so we've established that having these multiple generations in the workforce together is a great thing. So why aren't we seeing more of this? What in the world is going on? Well, there are some common myths and stereotypes that might really be getting in the way of helping us cultivate these age diverse workplaces. There are some stereotypes about a variety of different ages. Some people think, well, if you're of a certain age, maybe you're not willing to learn new things or not willing to work hard to learn in general. Maybe you'll leave if you're within a certain age range. Maybe you're going to be taking jobs away from other people who are in a particular job market. Sometimes we see a stereotype where people think that a certain age of employee might cost the company too much. And again, if you look at these four different categories up here, you'll see these stereotypes across every age range. I have heard people speak about younger workers who might leave a job earlier than anticipated. But I've also heard employers say the same thing about older workers. I've heard arguments made as well for younger workers costing too much and maybe taking more time off than the employer had anticipated. But I've also heard employers say older workers might cost too much when it comes to healthcare costs and such. So we've got these myths and stereotypes, and people, have their conditioned history that they kind of bring to the workplace as employees and as employers. So there's a lot that goes into kind of unpacking where these myths and stereotypes come from. But we see that these different myths and stereotypes are pervasive across age ranges, and really how they impact an employer or an employee depends on that particular individual's experience. But it's important to note that there's no research basis for any of these myths or stereotypes that you see up here. It's not actually rooted in research at all. We do know that up to 38% of hiring managers admit to some age bias when reviewing resumes. I think that we all have some inherent biases that we're always looking to overcome. We're human beings, we're imperfect. And it's something that we need to acknowledge as hiring managers. People do sometimes show age bias when they are considering who they might hire for employment and who might kind of make their way through that next step in the process to potentially become employed. We also know that people in that age range of 40 to 65 have said that they've experienced a good amount of age-based discrimination, or what they perceive to be age-based discrimination. And we have also seen that with the younger age groups as well. So you'll have some individuals in the older age range, and it's really kind of specific to particular industries. So, for instance, in the tech industry, this is one where you hear a lot of people saying, "Hey, I have witnessed age-based discrimination or experienced it myself in technology and marketing in some very particular fields." And then in some other fields, you will hear younger adults who say, "Gosh, I just can't seem to get hired because my employer doesn't feel like I bring enough experience to the table. But how can I bring a certain level of experience given my age range?" So there's a lot that is unsaid that we really see across different age ranges when it comes to that perception of age-based discrimination. And really perception counts for so much. Perception is everything. We also see a high number percentage of people entering their 50s who have had stable employment but have then been kind of pushed out or laid off in the workforce. And what we see once people enter that age group is it's really hard for them to recover financially, even when that effort is put into reskilling and really putting themselves back out into the workforce. They don't tend to kind of recoup those earnings that were lost during that gap, and they don't tend beyond their 50s to really advance financially in their careers.
We actually do also have an implicit bias test and on our resource slide at the very end, because I
Yes.
think we are all human, right? And bias is something that can happen whether we know it or not. And that test is a really fascinating way just to get some insight, I think, into what our own biases might be, that we know of or don't know of.
That's a really fascinating resource. It's a really neat tool to use. I know when I've used it before, it uncovered for me some biases that I wasn't aware of. And then that's great
Mhm.
data for me to use to make sure that I'm taking the steps to be as bias free as possible.
Mhm.
So let's jump into some steps that we can take. We've got some opportunities in what we call the 3 Ps. We're going to look at policy, process, and practice. So we know that we can commit to eliminating our implicit biases, and that tool that Susan just mentioned is a great start. Exploring that tool in our resources section, that's going to kind of orient you to some possible implicit biases that you might hold. We can commit to eliminating those biases and pursuing generational diversity, and we've talked about what a lot of the benefits of that are. We can revisit and update these hiring processes that we know are a little bit outdated at this point. And then we can request, recognize, and reward best practices moving forward. So these are some things that we want to give you some tools for today. So let's take a closer look at policy and some of the steps we can take that will lead us to bias-free hiring, because you want to find the most qualified individual for the job that you have, and you want to make sure that bias is not getting in the way of that. So employers that we have worked with who are competitive and who are really adhering to some of these concepts, they are coaching the owners, the HR teams, hiring managers in really identifying and preventing that implicit bias. And sometimes they'll use outside resources like us, like presentations such as these, to really develop more of an understanding of how you can engage in that prevention. They're also including age in company diversity policies. We know that this is something getting a lot of traction right now, increasing the adherence to diversity policies for businesses. But a lot of those policies do not include age. So that is something that we want to encourage everybody to take a closer look at. How can you include age in your own company diversity policy? If it's not there already, it's worth really taking another look at. Removing those age identifiers from employment applications is another key behavior that we're encouraging everybody to start engaging in. And this might involve actually identifying somebody on your team who is able to redact that information before the hiring team gets hold of that application or of that resume. Using skill-based assessments. This is another piece that is so very important. You want to make sure that the individuals that you are hiring have the skills that are necessary to do the job. And we get skills in a variety of ways. We're going to take a closer look at that in a little bit. Offering that flexibility in work schedules and locations, which we know can really resonate with different generations in different ways. So, Susan, you had pointed out in one of the earlier slides that we looked at that some of the younger generations really value that flexibility with scheduling and not, adhering to that traditional sort of 9 to 5 schedule where you're locked into an office cubicle for a certain amount of time every single day. That flexibility we know is really powerful with some generations. We also see that with older generations as well, where we might have individuals who are not quite ready to retire yet, but they would still like to work a certain number of hours, maybe not full time. Maybe they'd like to work, a part-time schedule. And we can look at some ways to offer that flexibility and maybe do some job sharing across a couple of different employees. We also know that location flexibility is something that has really become an important motivating factor, especially post-COVID. During COVID, so many individuals were able to switch to a remote or a hybrid sort of practice across their jobs and across sectors. And now we're seeing that a lot of employees really value that still and want that flexibility with location. So where we're able to offer flexibility with location, we want to take a closer look at that. And then encouraging that reciprocal mentoring that we know is so valuable to every generation. Every generation, all of these age groups have something to offer somebody else. And it's important that we're really tapping into that. That's what's going to keep your talent continuing to grow just right there within your own organization. And that's what's going to keep people there, keep people motivated to show up to work. When we look at the process in this redacted application review, we want to make sure, again, that we are advancing candidates with the right skills. So we talked earlier about how you can identify an individual on your hiring team who's not involved in the actual final selection process and have them redact those different age identifiers. You can also equip your reviewers with a list of the required skills. Sometimes you end up having a hiring team that is actually not familiar with really those skills that are most inherent to the position. So making sure they've got that list of the required skills for the job. And we'll talk a little bit more later about the sort of need to have skills versus the nice to have skills and differentiating between those two. We also want to look at redacting candidates' applications of identifiers that are not really related to competency level. So we've talked about age, but some other things that fall into this category include gender, name, education dates, where they live exactly, their phone number, their email. There's a lot of information that you can glean about somebody from that information that you see on applications. You can really pull a lot of detail out of there that can kind of introduce bias into your decision making process. So you want to really take a closer look at redacting that information so that what you're examining when you're considering hiring somebody are those competency related um, factors. Also, having reviewers recommend that candidates who move on in the interview process are moving on based on the skills that they have shown they have for the position. We want to get back to skills-based hiring and recognizing that there are a lot of letters that we can have after our names, and it's a wonderful thing to have achieved a high level of education in a field, but sometimes we're finding a mismatch between the level of education that is required for a position and the actual requirements on the job. And we want to make sure that the skills that are required for the job are really being closely considered and looking at how education matches up with that. So when we get into kind of the old model, it really helps to give us some information on the problem with proxies, right? We've got the old model, which is bachelor's degree required for a lot of positions that maybe don't necessarily really need that bachelor's degree experience. And then in addition to the bachelor's degree, 5 years of industry experience. This is kind of the standard that you would see in job postings. And what we are really suggesting based on our interactions with businesses and with prospective employees is that if you update your model, you'll find that the bachelor's degree or relevant education in a particular field is a plus, but is not always a requirement for a particular role. So we really want to encourage people to think outside the box with that. Is that degree actually a necessary component? Is that really a necessary factor when you're examining whether someone has the actual skills for a position? In a lot of situations, it will be. It actually will be a necessary component, but there are some situations where it's really not, and where you might be inadvertently really eliminating and not looking at a number of employees who might actually be very well equipped to do the job and do it well. So we really want to bring people around to looking at that relevant experience and looking at transferable skills. Some people have fabulous decades long experience in a particular field that would really transfer over nicely into another field.
I think too, one of the strategies that can be helpful for looking at is that, bachelor's degree required is really kind of breaking down too, what skills and knowledge is that person earning with that bachelor's degree. So maybe bachelor's degree could be one route, but the other route might be, well, here's the knowledge and skills that we would need. Because as Carrie mentioned, there are people that could bring those knowledge and skills to the job that may not have that formal degree.
Absolutely. And that was the perfect segue to this next
Mhm.
point that we have here, Susan. When we're looking at some of the skills needed for the job, so here are some top 4 skills that we often see that employers are really looking for with prospective employees: that ability to communicate, think critically, problem solve, and to just demonstrate general leadership qualities. And a college degree is absolutely one way that many individuals can gain these skills. Not always. There are different degree programs. There are, some degree programs that might focus in on certain areas more than others. And there are so many different college degree programs out there that I really think some do a better job of establishing these skills than others. There are a lot of different focus areas now when we look at degree programs. But we really need to see that college degree path, like Susan pointed out, as being one potential avenue to developing these skills. But there are so many other ways that employees can gain these skills. There are a variety of licensing and certificate programs out there. There's work experience, apprenticeships, internships, online and self guided learning, which we know has really taken off in this last decade, associate's degrees, training programs, and boot camps. And you do not want to overlook volunteer experience. I've worked with a number of individuals who are job seekers and employers where you have a job seeker who's got years worth of volunteer experience in a particular field, and they sometimes don't even think to put that on their resume because it wasn't actually paid experience, yet it set them up to have such a high skill level in a particular field. So it's one of those things that I'm always talking with prospective employees and with employers about. You don't want to discount that volunteer experience. But I think this graphic here really helps illustrate the number of ways that you can achieve a high skill level that prepares you adequately to enter a particular sector, whether you have a college degree or not. So we want to make everybody aware of this, and keep in mind you want to be open-minded about the number of ways that people can gain these skills. You also want to look for those transferable skills. I love this example. So this is actually an example from a local company, and they were working on air conditioning repair, and they had a manual that they were using. And they had their customer service team communicating with people and teaching them about, this manual, how to use this manual, how to step through this manual. And when we look at how you build a good, solid customer service team, we've kind of got, different criteria in mind that might be applicable to that sort of process. But what this team found was they were having a hard time hiring. They weren't really quite looking at all the different avenues and exploring all the different avenues. And they zeroed in on retired teachers. They realized what we are really needing is someone who can explain this process in a patient manner, and who understands the structure of this process and can communicate it effectively. Who better to do that than a retired teacher? And traditionally, we might not think of a retired teacher going into customer service, but for this particular company, it was the golden ticket. It was a perfect solution, and it really equipped them with the employees that they needed. So looking for those transferable skills can be a really powerful tool.
So when we're taking this conversation about skills and applying it to our job descriptions, there's a few ways that we can break them down. And I love this chart here. I think that really looks at all the different avenues. So the required skills in the job description are really those, deal breakers, those must-haves,
Mhm.
that the person has to come to the job knowing this information. It's something that really can't be taught on the job. It's something they need to come in with. And so this section is really meant to, right, eliminate those who don't meet these really kind of basic competencies that we want for the position. This second kind of preferred skill set, this is really where on the job training can shine. So maybe this is for those candidates who they might not meet, 10 out of 10 of all kind of like the keywords that we're looking for on the job description, but they have a lot of potential to really succeed on the job. And these skills can be taught during onboarding. So it's not those deal breakers. It's something that can still be taught um, once they get hired. And then this second tier of preferred is really those skills that are can really help the person stand out. So if you have several candidates and you're having a tough time choosing between candidates, these competencies can really help candidates kind of shine and come up to the top of the pile, if you will, of who you want to take in that interview process. Oh, I did want to mention too with the job descriptions. I just remembered we have a few tools at the end as well that can really help in developing those skills-based job descriptions. So there's a tool called Skillitizer, kind of a fun name that you can use to develop a skills-based job description. And then each workforce center, so Employment Services of Weld County and Larimer County Economic and Workforce Development, both have services to review job descriptions as well. So you can submit your job description, and then both of our counties can provide feedback as well. So just something to consider as you're developing these skills-based descriptions. In addition to the descriptions, we can really look at how we want to support that work environment. So to really set the environment up for success.
Mhm.
So one of the ways that we can do this is really using supportive language. So really showing kind of how we support our employees by being cognizant of the language that we're using. Um, And Karrie, I know you mentioned this example before of, sometimes it can be easy, right, to say, hey, you guys, right, as some language that we're using. And that might be something that we commonly do, but there might be other language that we can use that can be more supportive of all people in the room, so hey, you all. And that might be one example.
I'm so glad you mentioned that example. And here's where some AI tools can come into play. Now we're in this age of artificial intelligence,
Mhm.
right? And I know that's a whole separate topic. There's a lot of emotions involved with, everything going on with AI. But there's one tool in particular that I have used with businesses and with job seekers. It's called Udily. It's Yoodli. And it's actually a program that can record your speech and give you feedback in real time. And that exact example that you gave happened to me once when I was presenting and I was using Udily as a tool and having Udily give me some feedback. And it flagged me, a little box popped up and it said, hey, you're not using inclusive language here, because I did address a room full of people as you guys instead of saying something like you all. And I found it to be so helpful because it was able to give me that real-time information so that I could change my own patterns immediately. And I learned from it. I find that I learn from it every day. But there's a number of different AI tools like that we can actually use to help us with things like using more supportive language in the workplace.
I think that's such a great resource to have. Thank you for sharing that, Karrie. And because it is pretty amazing, some of the things that we do every day, but right, that awareness might not be there that we're using like you guys versus you all.
Exactly.
So those tools can be really helpful. Other things that we can do to kind of really set the environment up for success is to really recognize and provide opportunities for kind of interaction between our employees and to get feedback from our employees as well, so that we really know kind of what they need and what we can provide. So providing those opportunities where we can really talk as a team, about our needs can be really beneficial. Updating physical environment. So sometimes there are kind of smaller things that we can do in our physical environment that can really help set our employees up for success. So one example might be looking at flooring. So maybe if you work in a business where your employees are required, to stand for a large portion of the day, are there small changes that can be made to provide, pads, an area that people stand often, or things that you can do to really provide that supportive flooring? I know you've given an example of this as well, Karrie, really in one company that looked at why their employees were leaving and found that one of the reasons they were leaving was because the floor was too hard to stand on.
Right.
Um,
It was BMW, and it's funny
yeah.
that such a major company actually, took the trouble to get this kind of feedback and use it to make a change. I always love it when you see companies that are gathering that data and using it to actually create change, not just kind of collecting the data for the sake of collecting it. But they were interviewing their employees who were leaving because they noticed that they had huge numbers of some of their older employees walking out the door and saying, I'm done, I'm not going to work here anymore. And when they interviewed them, what they learned was that the floor that they had in the factory was making it so that it was very physically uncomfortable for them to be on their feet for so long, but the job really required being on their feet for so long. Yet these particular individuals who were leaving had so much institutional knowledge and just so much know-how about kind of the day in and day out, sort of intricacies of working in those roles, that the company kind of panicked and said, gosh, we cannot keep losing all of these older workers at the rate that we're losing them. We've got to look at how we can update this environment and make it more conducive and friendly, for all ages. So they invested something like tens of thousands of dollars, which for a company like BMW obviously is not that much money, to redo their floors. And that was it. That was the fix that they needed to actually get large number of employees to say, okay, I'm willing to stay and I'm willing to continue contributing to this workforce. So just a simple change like that for a large company like BMW really doesn't cost that much, can make all the difference.
And it's amazing, I think, what these small changes can really do for our employees to really make that environment that's supportive to all ages.
Absolutely.
So we also can look at some strategies that can be applied to each generation specifically, and you will see some overlap in these strategies too, which I think is really neat, and then also some differences. So when we look at the traditionalists, one thing that we can do is to really emphasize kind of appreciation for the individuals being there, and then right stability of really making sure these individuals feel that they're in this stable work environment because it aligns with some of their values of loyalty and rules as well. So offering opportunities that could provide high levels of human interaction and especially offline human interaction, because this generation might not have had exposure to technology, providing these opportunities where they can really interact with individuals can be very helpful. And similarly, really providing an environment where they can work alongside other people. So baby boomers, we mentioned, that baby boomers and the importance that kind of incentives can have. So providing an opportunity for kind of tangible rewards, for kind of performance or different actions that are done at the job, or providing those opportunities, right, to volunteer and have some of these other engagements. Similarly, we can look for opportunities to advance in the organization and to really kind of learn and grow. And because I think, this generation has so much knowledge to share as well as many generations do, really providing the chance to use their voice and share their knowledge and their opinions can be really valuable. For kind of Generation X, some of the things that we can do with this generation in particular. So one, because Generation X tends to be fairly independent, providing an environment that really encourages, trust without having as many micromanaging tactics, can be really useful to really help that independence shine. Um, Offering opportunities, right, to develop and continue to grow their skills. And then kind of similar to what we see with some of the traditionalists, right, really extending appreciation as well for the value that this generation has brought to the workforce. So for millennials, and we mentioned the value on right mentorship and training. Something I think that can go along with that really too is providing constructive feedback. I think this generation can really thrive on those constructive feedback opportunities to kind of learn and grow. Same, right? Providing mentorship, as Karrie mentioned earlier, some of this generation has research has shown that they might leave right the workforce without those mentorship opportunities. That's one of the top reasons. So that's key. And then it can be helpful as well for millennials to really have a visual of kind of the growth that can happen and what that roadmap might look like in the organization for them to grow along with the organization. For Gen Z, I think kind of as we mentioned earlier, right, flexible work schedules can be really helpful. Having kind of attractive pay. I know that's hard right now, but this generation in particular can be really attracted to good pay right now. Because there is that connection of wanting to work for an employer that shares their values, really emphasizing the values as a company. And as a company, how you're providing support to your employees can be kind of very attractive for this generation. And then the opportunities for promotions. And you'll see in all the generations that we've listed here, opportunities for growth and advancement are kind of really core for people of all ages. And I think that also aligns with, right, that work and learn model that we shared earlier in the presentation is providing those opportunities for learning and for advancement and growth. So in general, when we look at kind of generations managing maybe some of the conflicts that might come up, or really looking at how we can support all generations, I think some of the strategies we can do is really acknowledging that generational differences kind of do exist, right? There are differences in the generations, in how each generation was raised, right? What they were exposed to, what they value. And on, the same front, even though there are some generational differences, we also want to acknowledge that there are some shared qualities and
Mhm.
there are some things that do unite those generations, such as advancement and growth opportunities. Finding ways as an organization too that we can, accommodate the different mindsets that exist, and really looking at how we can use each generation's strengths in our workforce. And one of the ways I think that we can maximize strengths, one of the great foundational pieces, is to really encourage, right, open communication, providing that supportive environment where people feel, safe to share, and that they feel heard and listened to when they do contribute, their voice and their kind of opinions and perspectives. Um, and one of the resources too, if you're interested in learning more about, management strategies or just the differences between the generations, is this EWF International that's linked here. They have some helpful tools related to leadership as a whole, and differences that we see in our workforce between the generations. So I think kind of to sum up a lot of what we have said today, this report has some very comprehensive, some might say exhaustive strategies in
Long
it.
report.
Yes, long report in what we can do, but very helpful. And I think one of the themes that we see here too is that focus on continuous learning, because we are working and learning and working and learning. The more opportunities that we can provide to really help our employees continue to learn and grow, and something that we see valued right across generations, I think can really help us thrive as we're looking at this future of work.
And I love this quote here. The concerned CEO
Mhm.
asks, but what if we invest in developing people and then they leave us? A valid question, because we know that there is a cost that comes to investing in people. But I love this
Mhm.
response from the wise HR counsel. What if we don't and they stay? And that is the important thing to keep in mind about this continuum of growth that is, so important in our workforce. If you do not continue to invest in developing your people and they stay, then you've got a workforce that's not as competitive as it can be. And that's not what's going to translate to the growth and the profitability and the productivity that you want to see in your workplace.
And even I think the reciprocity too, right? Across what each generation kind of, and each person in the workforce can really bring, as well, with each other and to the organization. So we have a few kind of resources here that we would encourage, checking out. Some of them we've mentioned kind of through our presentation, like the, implicit association test to look at implicit bias, the Skillitizer job posting tool. And then we have others here that really relate to looking at age-friendly workplaces and age-friendly initiatives. So thank you for joining us today. We're very glad to have you here, and we hope this was
Thank you.
valuable information.
Thanks so much for joining us today, everybody.